The early morning mist clung to the forest like a shroud, muffling the sounds of boots crunching over frost-hardened leaves. Somewhere, not far from the front lines, German soldiers moved cautiously, their rifles at the ready, their nerves stretched thin. It had been a long campaign, and morale was fragile. Every shadow seemed alive, every rustle a possible threat. Yet nothing could have prepared them for what was about to unfold, a terror so precise and so sudden that it would leave 47 men dead before the sun had even climbed high. The story begins with a young sniper, barely more than a boy in years, but already hardened by months of relentless combat. He had earned a reputation for being reckless, for testing the limits of his weapons, for tinkering in ways others might call foolish. The men in his unit called him stupid behind his back, not because he was unskilled, but because he refused to follow rules that, in his mind, got in the way of results. Yet it was this very stubbornness, this willingness to challenge convention, that would soon make him one of the most feared men on that stretch of the battlefield. He carried a rifle that had seen better days. Scars of past battles were etched into its wooden stock, and the metal gleamed faintly in the weak light, polished not by care, but by constant use. But what made this rifle deadly was the scope. Not just any scope, a standard-issue optic, dull and unassuming, that most soldiers barely paid attention to. For him, however, it was a puzzle, a tool to be pushed beyond its intended limits. On a quiet morning, when the wind whispered through the trees and the smell of damp earth hung heavy in the air, he made an adjustment, a tiny, almost careless tweak to the scope. To any observer, it would have seemed insignificant, perhaps even foolish. But that small, seemingly stupid adjustment changed everything. It gave him a sightline others could not imagine, a way to strike targets he might never have reached before. And he tested it methodically, patiently, waiting for the first signs of movement. He did not rush. There was no dramatic charge, no frantic shouting, just the calm, relentless observation of a hunter who had found the perfect vantage point. Meanwhile, German soldiers, confident in their positions and routine patrols, had no idea that danger was watching them through that lens. They moved as they always did, unaware that the forest around them had become a trap. At first, it was subtle. A rustle here, a snap of a twig there. A man would fall, and the others would freeze, trying to pinpoint the source of the attack. Panic began to spread slowly, quietly, like smoke seeping through the cracks of a cabin. The sniper's first shots were precise, almost surgical, and the confusion it caused only amplified his effectiveness. Reports from survivors would later describe the fear, in almost tangible terms, like a shadow that clung to them, twisting their minds, making them jump at sounds that weren't there. The young sniper had no interest in hiding the horror he caused. He simply focused on his task, adjusting for wind and distance, taking shots that seemed impossible from where he was positioned. Every death served as a warning, each soldier's fall a grim signal that something extraordinary was at work. But how could one man, with a single rifle and what seemed a foolish adjustment to a scope, cause such devastation? It wasn't luck, not entirely. It was a combination of skill, observation, and the element of surprise. He knew the terrain intimately, the bends in the paths, the cover that seemed solid but wasn't. He understood how fear spread, how soldiers reacted when they thought they were safe, and he exploited every instinct, every twitch of human behavior to devastating effect. For hours, the forest became a nightmare. The air was thick with tension, every snap of a branch a potential threat. The Germans tried to regroup, tried to find cover, tried to locate the source of the attacks. They searched, panicked, whispered, but the sniper remained unseen, methodical, almost invisible in his patience. Each shot rang out like a bell of doom, and with every fall, the fear deepened, spreading like wildfire through the ranks. It was in this environment that the young sniper truly shined, not because he was reckless, but because he understood what others overlooked. A slight adjustment here, a subtle observation there, and suddenly he could see angles that were impossible for anyone else. He could strike before his enemies even knew they were in danger. And the so-called stupid adjustment he had made to his scope was the key that unlocked all of it. By the end of the morning, 47 men had fallen, victims not of brute force, but of precision, patience, and a mind that refused to follow the rules others considered sacred. The forest was silent afterward, save for the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. The survivors would speak of a terror that felt almost unnatural, a presence that was everywhere and nowhere at once. Rumors spread quickly, and even German officers, trained and seasoned, began to whisper of the boy who could see through the trees, who could strike before anyone had a chance to react. This was the moment when panic truly took hold, not just among the soldiers who faced him directly, but within the ranks, a creeping dread that perhaps no position was safe, that the forest itself had turned against them. It was the perfect storm of fear and skill, of timing and audacity, and it began with a decision that could have been written off as foolish, a single adjustment to a scope, one man's stubborn refusal to accept limitations. As the sun rose higher, painting shafts of light through the canopy, the sniper's presence became legend among those who witnessed it. Not because he was the biggest or strongest or most heavily armed, but because he saw the battlefield differently. And sometimes it is the ones who dare to be stupid in the eyes of others who change everything. And yet, this was only the beginning. The full story of how one sniper brought a unit to its knees, and the lessons that would ripple through military minds for years to come, had yet to unfold. The forest had become a chessboard, each German soldier a piece moving blindly, reacting to threats they couldn't see. The sniper, barely moving himself, observed everything. He understood not just the terrain, but the psychology of fear. He didn't need to chase his targets, they came to him. Every step they took, every hesitant glance, was a calculation in his mind, and he struck with a precision that seemed almost preternatural. He had found the perfect perch on a ridge overlooking a narrow pathway frequently used by enemy patrols. It was a spot no one would ever suspect. A fallen tree, moss-covered and jagged, provided concealment. The young sniper adjusted his scope one more time, aligning it to account for the morning wind that shifted unpredictably through the trees. What seemed like a minor tweak to others, a subtle rotation of the dial, was, in fact, the key to hitting targets at ranges previously thought impossible. The bullet paths curved with uncanny accuracy, guided not by magic, but by careful observation, understanding, and a touch of audacious experimentation. As the German patrols moved through the path, the first man fell silently, his body hitting the frozen ground without a sound that could warn his comrades. Confusion spread instantly. Soldiers ducked behind trees, shouting warnings, scanning the tree line with mounting terror. And then it happened again. Another man fell, then another, each shot fired from a distance that seemed untouchable. It was as though death itself had claimed the path. Some tried to return fire, but the sniper's movements were minimal, almost imperceptible. A flash of steel here, the shifting of his body there, and then nothing. The scope allowed him to see angles invisible to the naked eye, to calculate trajectories that turned mere bullets into guided missiles. He wasn't just shooting, he was orchestrating fear, manipulating every instinct the soldiers had about safety, cover, and timing. Reports from survivors later described a surreal scene. Men scattered, trying to regroup. Their attempts to set traps or advance cautiously were met with calculated shots that disrupted any semblance of order. Fear became contagious. The soldiers, trained to follow commands, found themselves frozen, their minds questioning every step, every breath. And the sniper? He watched, waited, and chose his targets with meticulous care. It wasn't just luck or skill, it was creativity. He noticed patterns in their movements, small habits formed by fatigue and routine. Soldiers adjusting their helmets, pausing to check their maps, exchanging whispered words, each action was a chance to strike. He exploited these moments with deadly efficiency. The adjustment to his scope that others had mocked as stupid allowed him to account for wind, distance, and even the subtle sway of branches in the breeze. It was a combination of physics and patience that turned ordinary bullets into instruments of terror. Interestingly, the sniper also understood the value of unpredictability. He didn't fire at regular intervals or from obvious locations. Sometimes he waited for hours in complete stillness, letting the soldiers believe the danger had passed, then struck with sudden violence. Other times, he fired multiple rounds in quick succession, each shot from a slightly different angle, making it impossible for anyone to predict his position. By midday, the number of casualties had grown to 47. Officers, desperate to maintain order, attempted countermeasures, flanking maneuvers, smoke screens, and increased patrols, but every attempt was anticipated and neutralized. The sniper had memorized the terrain, understood the psychology of fear, and refined his adjustments to a level that rendered conventional tactics ineffective. What was considered a stupid alteration to a simple scope had transformed him into a one-man army. Yet amid the carnage, the sniper showed restraint. He didn't aimlessly fire into the trees or indiscriminately target every figure he saw. Each shot was deliberate, each death a calculated blow to the enemy's cohesion, and in that precision lay the most terrifying part. He could have killed more, but he chose not to, prolonging the sense of dread, letting panic spread like wildfire, ensuring that every step the Germans took was haunted by the possibility of instant death. This event left an impression far beyond the immediate battlefield. Survivors would later recount how the sniper's actions defied logic, how fear had become a weapon as potent as the rifle itself. Officers studied the aftermath and realized that morale, more than numbers or firepower, had been shattered. A single soldier, armed with insight, patience, and a scope adjusted in a way no one expected, had rewritten the rules of engagement in that sector. Historians examining the incident later noted several fascinating details. The sniper's understanding of ballistics was rudimentary but instinctive. He compensated for distance, wind, and even the movement of his own breathing without formal calculation. He intuitively knew how to maximize the reach and lethality of his shots, and while others relied on structured plans and rigid procedures, he adapted continuously, responding to the chaos he himself created. Equally striking was the psychological impact. German troops, trained to rely on discipline and numbers, found themselves immobilized by fear. They became their own worst enemies, hesitating, miscommunicating, and ultimately falling into patterns that the sniper could exploit. It was a case study in how perception can be manipulated on the battlefield, how a single individual can turn fear into a weapon more deadly than any artillery shell. By the end of the day, the young sniper had vanished almost as quietly as he had appeared. No grand retreat, no heroic charge, just a ghostly presence that lingered in memory, leaving a battlefield littered with casualties and a lingering question. How could one man, with one rifle, achieve so much destruction? The incident would echo for months, shaping training, influencing tactics, and inspiring both fear and awe. Soldiers would whisper about the boy with the stupid scope, a man who defied conventional wisdom and proved that ingenuity and courage, even when dismissed as reckless, could change the course of combat. And yet, what truly made his story remarkable was not just the deaths, not just the fear he sowed, but the lesson it left behind. On a battlefield, it is not always the strongest or the largest force that wins. Sometimes it is the one who sees differently, who dares to adjust, to experiment, and to act when others hesitate. The stage was set, the battlefield scarred, and the legend of the sniper was far from over. What would come next would push the limits of fear, precision, and human ingenuity even further. The forest had quieted, but the tension lingered like smoke. Soldiers who had survived the morning dared not move without extreme caution, their eyes scanning every shadow, every swaying branch. The young sniper had disappeared from sight, but his presence was everywhere, etched into the memory of every man who had survived his fury. Fear had become a living entity, wrapping itself around the German ranks and tightening with every heartbeat. By late afternoon, the officers realized that conventional tactics were failing. Every attempt to probe the forest, to locate the shooter, met with failure. Men were too terrified to advance, too paralyzed by the invisible threat. Orders were shouted, plans were hastily drawn, but the sniper had already anticipated these reactions. He had studied their movements for hours, memorized patterns, and adjusted his position with an almost surgical precision. Every action they took only played into his hands. What made his campaign so devastating was not simply marksmanship, it was psychological warfare at its purest form. He had turned hesitation into vulnerability, indecision into death. Soldiers flinched at sounds that were harmless, misread shadows as threats, and exhausted themselves searching for a phantom. Even the experienced veterans of the German army, trained to withstand fear, found themselves undone. Every pause, every glance behind a tree, every whispered warning was a reminder of an unseen predator. The sniper's stupid adjustment to his scope had enabled him to see beyond what others thought possible. Distances that once required careful calculation could now be judged instinctively. Wind, elevation, and terrain that would normally compromise a shot were accounted for in a subtle twist of a dial, and this simple, almost careless adjustment gave him an edge that no one could counter. It was as if the rifle had become an extension of his own senses, each bullet a statement of dominance over both men and environment. As the day wore on, the toll became evident. 47 men lay lifeless on the forest floor, their bodies scattered across the frozen earth. Survivors whispered of a boy who could strike at will, a man who seemed to bend reality to his purpose. Panic had evolved into superstition. Some spoke of curses, of the forest itself taking sides, as if the sniper had become an unstoppable force of nature. Yet, to those who studied his actions closely, there was no magic, only unmatched observation, patience, and the courage to act when others hesitated. The officers tried one last maneuver. They gathered a small detachment to flush him out, moving slowly and deliberately, hoping to draw him into a predictable pattern. But the sniper had already predicted this. From his concealed perch, he watched their advance like a hawk circling prey. As soon as they entered the kill zone, bullets rang out with deadly precision, each one hitting its mark before panic could ripple through the ranks. By the time the officers called for a retreat, it was too late. The forest had already claimed its toll, and the lesson was seared into every mind present. One man, armed with insight and daring, could topple an entire unit. When the sun finally dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the battlefield, the young sniper vanished. He left no traces, no celebrations, no claims of victory. His work was done, and he retreated into silence, leaving only the aftermath and the stories that would grow with each retelling. Officers would analyze the event for months, trying to understand how a single soldier had caused such devastation. Manuals would later reference the incident as a cautionary tale, a reminder that rigid tactics could be undone by ingenuity, observation, and a refusal to follow convention blindly. In the weeks that followed, the legend of the sniper spread far beyond the forest. Soldiers who had faced him carried the memory like a scar, an indelible mark of fear, respect, and disbelief. To some, he was reckless. To others, he was brilliant. But everyone agreed on one thing. The adjustment that seemed so foolish, so trivial, had turned him into something far more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. What makes this story remarkable is not just the body count or the chaos he caused. It is the demonstration of human ingenuity under pressure, the reminder that courage is sometimes measured not by brute strength, but by creativity and decisiveness. It challenges the assumptions of warfare, the rules that commanders rely on, and the predictable patterns that armies believe they can control. One adjustment, one brave and seemingly stupid choice, can alter the course of a battle, shake morale, and leave an impact far larger than any ordinary action. The forest eventually healed. Nature reclaimed what had been scarred by fear and gunfire. Trees grew over the paths, leaves covered the ground where men had fallen, and the wind whispered through the branches as if trying to carry away the memory of what had happened. But the legend of the young sniper remained, passed down through whispered accounts, analyzed in military studies, and remembered in the hearts of those who understood the rare combination of skill, patience, and audacity that had shaped it. The lesson is clear. The difference between defeat and survival, between fear and control, often lies in a single mind willing to see what others do not, to take a risk that seems foolish, and to act with precision when chaos surrounds them. The sniper's story is a chilling testament to that truth, a reminder that on any battlefield, the most unexpected factor, the smallest adjustment, the quietest decision, can determine the fate of many. And though the boy with the stupid scope vanished from the forest that day, the echoes of his actions would resonate far beyond the trees, a haunting example of how courage, cunning, and the audacity to challenge convention can change everything.